So this was not a good week for the gaming industry. No matter which way you look at it, whether it was with the malicious hack of Insomniac and Sony and 1.3 million files just being dumped online that did include a ton of employee information, to even how the press and media responded to this with some heavy inconsistencies, we'll say. Well, I've been talking to a lot of people about this just to kind of get the feeling going around, and one person in particular mentioned that they thought this entire situation with the morality part being brought into it and the gaming news side was more interesting than all the stuff that leaked out within Insomniac. So I figured, I do cover the news quite a bit, obviously, on this channel, and I figured I'll talk a little bit about this here today. And of course, this comes back to the Insomniac leak, which has been massive news over the last week or so, with 1.5 terabytes of data just being dumped online after a ransomware group didn't get what they wanted, which about $2 million from Sony. Sony said no, as they should, and that was it. They dropped it online, and that did include a playable development build of Wolverine. And since then, it's just continued to have more and more information get out there. These ransomware attacks aren't anything new. We've actually been seeing these for years now in gaming, and I feel like that's just because of how much money flows through games. Many of these hacking organizations, these groups, probably figure what's $2 million to some of these companies that will end up grossing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars even. It really comes down to a principle aspect as opposed to the money side. Sony could have obviously paid $2 million, drop in the bucket to them, but if they paid it, what would that mean for the future? Would that mean that more and more groups would show up and try to hack into their system that already seems to be kind of reeling right now with actually how much has hit Sony over the last year or so when it comes to these different hacks? So the correct thing is just not pay them, and yeah, let the information kind of just leak out, which did happen. Now, these ransomware attacks have been, as I mentioned, kind of plaguing the industry over the last several years. These include like CD Projekt, EA, Capcom, Riot Games, Bandai Namco, Take-Two. It's a consistent thing right now in gaming. And I feel like now more than ever, with as expensive as these projects are getting, becomes more and more damaging as we go along for these companies. But I will admit, the response from the press and the media for this one in particular, this most recent one, did have me questioning the way this industry is covered this week, more than ever, actually. So I just mentioned all those different companies, and as I look through them, with especially Capcom and Take-Two, the word that really comes up for me anyway, looking at what's happened this week with the press, it is probably the word consistency, which we'll be touching on more and more as we go along. So the two here, Capcom and Take-Two, are the ones that I really point to at this time, because they made headlines across the industry, with Capcom suffering basically an identical thing here when it comes to being a ransomware group that got a bunch of their information, include employee files as well as information for games in the future. And Capcom said no, and the information got dumped online. This was a malicious attack on Capcom with stolen files and information, but that was covered quite heavily, actually, by the press. Now, I will say, I did see some people who were kind of asking about kind of the morality side even then, but it was very, very small amounts of questioning, I'll say. A tweet here or there, and that was kind of it. But at least that conversation did come up slightly. Now, with Take-Two and Rockstar, not as much, no. It's because it was an early look at GTA 6. And as we saw recently, there was a full court case that took place, and the information was revealed that the person managed to hack into Take-Two and Rockstar in their Slack channel and did this from apparently a hotel room with Wi-Fi, their cell phone, and an Amazon Fire Stick. I mean, that's impressive sounding, but the results were the same. It was a malicious attack on Rockstar and Take-Two, where 90 some odd videos were taken and then dumped online, showing an early build of GTA 6, and then also some Slack channel messages, that sort of thing. So there were employees involved technically in that aspect, but that was covered heavily. Now, the information wasn't necessarily displayed as in here's a video of it, because Take-Two was vigilant. They were just copyright striking everything. I mean, it's Take-Two. You don't really mess with them when it comes to the courtroom or DMCA, because they will come after you to make a point. Them and Nintendo are very similar in that way. But actually, speaking of Nintendo, there's something called the Giga Leak, and this has been covered extensively. And that's mostly because there's just a lot of information coming out of it, which is one of the reasons this Insomniac situation is putting some of these outlets to the test with them looking at this around the idea of morality from what they've said. The information is so overwhelming. There's just so much coming out of it. It's like, oh, we should cover this, but should we cover this? Now, the Giga Leak is interesting because it's posted up on 4chan, an anonymous source, and it's a metric ton of information from Nintendo, dating back to like the early days of the company. It is incredible the amount of information, some big time discoveries, whether it's prototype builds, early development on consoles that never came out, accessories, and even the fact that apparently Luigi was somewhat planned for Mario 64 after the model was found in the game files. But there are questions around where this came from, and some believe that this was illegally obtained. And I would actually agree with that. The fact that there are, and once again, employee files, emails, full-on names and phone numbers even just kind of piled in there. It's like, where did this actually come from? And the fact that Nintendo themselves responded to a question around the Giga Leak saying, well, we're going to make our security better. I mean, what does that tell you, right? Yeah, these were probably obtained by a group or a person who got access in some way, social engineering, or who knows, maybe even ransomware for all we know at that point, and then just decided to dump it on 4chan anonymously, probably because they either didn't get their way or they said, hey, I got all this stuff. I'm just going to see what happens if I throw it out there online. Anyway, I bring all of that up to say that this isn't the first situation we've seen with these kind of implications that the information we're looking at that is genuinely compelling is stolen. It's illegally obtained, right? And this is once again a time where there's like a crossroad or just a fork in the road, and each outlet had to decide what they were going to do. Now, I feel like most probably reported on the hack. Generally speaking, hey, there was ransomware attack on Sony and Insomniac. They wanted this much money. Sony said no. They dumped all the files. And that's kind of like where the report ended. Others, though, actually dove into the information. IGN covered quite a bit of it. Kotaku did a very good write-up, actually, on it, and mostly focused in on the budget side that I think is very, very important for the gaming industry right now, as we are heading towards what appears to be a sustainability problem when it comes to the finances. The math isn't mathing is what I'll say as we go forward. Spider-Man 2018, and then jump up Spider-Man 2, and the budget tripled. What happens when Spider-Man 3 comes around? Okay, how do we figure this out when it comes to the money side of things? There's some serious questions, and we had some hard numbers displayed, which, again, sparks all kinds of conversation around this, but it does come back to stolen information. Now, I think in the gaming industry, the word journalist is thrown around a lot. Like, I mean, people on podcasts or who are just writing stuff on Twitter or just make videos on YouTube, I see journalists sometimes even get attached to them. And I will say, I think there is kind of like a set amount of people who I can look at and say, okay, those are definitely journalists in the gaming industry, right? So like Jason Schreier, Stephen Totillo, I think he was at Axios. I feel like he's independent now. They would check in on that. And then there's Gene Park, and I'll throw Takashi Machizuki in there as well. People who will more or less investigate, look into some of these companies, and just give us new information and insights that we didn't have previously, as opposed to really any of us on YouTube or running podcasts who are more or less taking information like that, or press releases or leaks or whatever that gets out there, trailers, announcements, and more or less add commentary, discussion, context, some of our own insight, and put it out there as what I would say either aggregators or entertainers. And I would estimate, 95% of the people online, myself included, that you're getting the information from would fall into that category as, I would say, just broad term of entertainer. And I think that's perfectly fine, because clearly it's a fun part of gaming to be in. It is genuinely interesting, and it's a good time going over all of the gaming news that comes out and talk about games we're playing and stuff. It's fun, right? But I don't necessarily think that you then turn around and hold that journalistic morality, that degree to them. And that actually includes people who are freelancing or just writing on different websites. I mean, most websites, obviously, you could just start up with WordPress or something. Again, the title of journalist, I feel like, just gets thrown around way more than it should. And because of this, I think there are just expectations placed on people that are not really fit to have them, to be honest. So because of this, I did see a lot of people who were questioned when it came to their decision not to cover some of this Insomniac stuff in detail. And my view on this, and I know this is probably going to annoy people, is I don't have any problem with people just saying, no, I'm not going to cover this. I don't feel right doing it. Or the thing I think would have been the way to go for just transparency, there's a conflict of interest there. But so the one that was really big that was getting thrown around, and I mean, they were just getting beaten down online, was kind of funny. Kind of the way they approached it is like, leave Insomniac alone. Kind of had more of a sympathetic view to it, and then they weren't really interested in discussing, again, were very compelling bits of information coming out from it, and they just got crushed online for it. And yeah, it's pretty clear if you just look at what's happening there. There is a relationship with Insomnia. I mean, they were in Spider-Man 2. You don't just accidentally get that, right? There is an attachment there with that company, whether it's Insomniac or even Sony. And that is something I feel like a lot of outlets have to wrestle with in general to get that access for review codes or early systems, hardware, what have you. And that does kind of fall into that gray area, right? Where how detached can the press be from companies they're reporting on to be neutral, or even, I think the best approach, neutral with a slight adversarial lean to a lot of these big billion-dollar companies. How do you do that when you feel like you need that access, right? It is difficult. It's a tightrope that they're all trying to walk right now. And when you feel like news breaks like this for a company that you are fairly attached to, you end up with that kind of approach that did not go over well. I feel like if I did, I just said, hey, look, there's a conflict of interest here. With this, and we don't feel comfortable doing this, talking about this stuff in depth. Maybe they even know people there. They're friends with them. And that's kind of it, right? You just be upfront about it. And I don't think it would have been as much of a scene, I'll say, as it was online with all of that happening. That said, the word that I keep coming back to is consistency. And it really came up here when you see outlets that are unsure of Insomniac and what to do there, but then are excited, gleeful even, to go over what happened with Capcom and their roadmap, or the GTA 6 leaks, all the videos and early development stuff there. It does, of course, create pause and make you wonder if it's a relationship maybe with Insomniac, or what is it about this studio that makes it different from something like Capcom. This is something that I have become concerned with for myself as well. And I will admit, looking around at some of the responses online to this from different outlets, whether it's again, websites, blogs, even people on YouTube, sure, but just in general, the gaming industry, did have me questioning the space a bit overall, because I do wonder if at times, maybe more recently, but just in general, if the press and the media that we'd like to think is more or less unbiased, somewhere in the middle, but not leaning towards and becoming friends with the companies, if they are getting too close, and it's something I thought of for myself as I go forward, would something ever come out where I'd be like, man, am I able to cover that? Because I am friends with them, or I do know them. Now, I will say, I've not really made a lot of friends in the industry, so maybe I'm not the best person to take advice from. I guess the biggest developer that I know is MVG, and he's done a lot of work. But for the most part, like Microsoft, I've been working with more and more recently. But when that Xbox information came out from the FTC hearing, I covered pretty much all of it, and well, they haven't kicked me out yet. So I guess in that case they were okay with it. But I mean, I was prepared for that to happen if that was the case, because I just feel like it's good, relevant information to the audience. And I saw Jeff Grubb kind of bring this up, the idea of like the morality side. I responded, I feel like if the information is relevant to an extent, I don't think anyone's running around talking about the employee. Like, let's look at all the different employees. I feel like that's completely irrelevant to any of the gaming conversation when it comes to the details that we're looking at for budgets or roadmaps being planned out. I feel like if you have that relevant information, you approach it with as much of an objective response as you can, presenting it. And then you have your opinion, your context to it, and stuff there, especially if you have like a show like I know Jeff does there. And then you kind of just live with the results. That's sort of the way I go. Again, though, I don't have a lot of friends necessarily in the industry, so maybe I'm not the one to take advice from. It just once again comes back to the consistency where you might talk about Capcom, maybe you talked about Take-Two with all the GTA 6 stuff, joking about it, and then it comes down to Insomniac, and all of a sudden there is a problem. And I think that's a genuine question to ask. What makes this different from something like Capcom? What makes this different from GTA 6? And to me, that is a hard question to answer, and I'm glad I don't have to answer it because I'm not a gaming journalist, and I talked quite a bit about the GTA 6 leaks and the Capcom roadmap. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below, especially with the morality stuff being brought into it, outlets choosing to cover it, some not on their own reasons that they presented. Because to me, no matter which way you look at this, it's just a bad week, or like a really bad week for the gaming industry. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.